people. They're super nice, and it's quite a small community too, so you get a chance to know everyone. The reason it was so great to get in contact with her is because she used to work at a place called the Cotton Candy Factory, which is, if you see the top shelf there, she's got all those really great, weird-looking toys. They're all from an artist named Tara McPherson, who's quite a big name in designer toys, and she owns the Cotton Candy Factory. So with Brittany, I got to understand a lot of the origins of this sort of stuff, and also it was helpful because she's been in the designer toy community for a while, and I'm fairly new to it. So understanding how it's sort of evolved over time and kind of seeing where it's going has been really great. This is the most recent interview I did. Rocco The Great is a designer in New York as well, and it just so happened he was on another one of the toy forums I kind of go on quite a bit. He just made his first designer toy. And between him and I, there was a lot of similarities in our work and what we were doing. So it was really, really great to talk to someone else that was going through the same journey. He doesn't cast his own toys like I do. His friend does that for him. But other than that, there was a lot of similarities. So this is Fat Cap Joe. I thought it was just a great little design. It also, much like my toy, comes from a comic book that he wrote. So I kind of like how that's translated for him from a two-dimensional character into this sort of tangible object that you can hold and pose. Well, not pose, I think that one's pretty static, but yeah, so that it was really, he didn't really have a lot of insight into the history, but it was just really great to meet a fellow designer. Paul Budnitz, excuse me, he was probably, I guess you could say it was the most impressive interview I got. And the reason for that is he co-founded Kid Robot, which is the main designer toy factory in the United States. He also worked really hard to bring designer toys from Asia, where the trend started, over to North America. So he knows a ton about the history. He was in there at the very beginnings, which was in the mid-90s. And he's also just an incredibly nice person that was really great about answering any questions I might have had and giving me some insight into where the toys are going, what sort of things are kind of happening now with them. So yeah, it was very, very useful. This was probably my favorite interview. Some of you might know Ted Stilson. He's from Lethbridge. Very nice man who is, first off, an impressive collector. He has the biggest collection of toys that I've ever seen. So being a big toy nerd, it was great to be able to go to his house and hold all these awesome toys that I drooled over on the internet. But he's also a creator. He created a blank vinyl toy. Actually, in the previous picture, I was holding one, a Moody, which is sort of a blank cow figure that you can do decoration on and that sort of thing. You can kind of see there, I chose this picture because it doesn't really display his face nicely, but there's a black and white, illustration on the wall. And then kind of down from his hand, there's this little gray pool of different sculptures. He's recreating that photograph as designer toys for the artist of the photograph. I thought that was really cool. He's been really inspirational because he's been in it since the beginning, and he contacts a lot of the artists and has these relationships with them. So I'll show you guys, there's some more of his collection. Oh, it's so nice. And that's just a small part of it. It's really quite cool. And that's Moody, the one he created. It's really neat. He actually hand sculpted the entire thing from same clay that I use, which is Sculpey. You're probably familiar with, sort of like a crafter's clay. And then he sent the pieces off, I believe it was to China, to have them made in vinyl. So he did this run of these toys, and then he sent them off to artists that he really enjoyed. There were a lot of Lethbridge artists that were involved with this, and they did a show, I believe it was probably about 7 years ago now, where some of the Lethbridge artists got together, did what they wanted on these dolls, and did a big art show. So here's an example of some of them customized, because it's sort of hard to explain what customization is. You can see here there's, some of them are from artists other than Ted. The ones with the really gorgeous stencil designs I think there's about 3 of them there. Yeah, those are the ones he's done. And so, yeah, it was really great to see all that. He also very generously gave me one of his Moody's, which was awesome because they're, I think he's only got 20 left now. So that is something I shall treasure for the rest of my life. So those were basically my interviews. So I'd like to try to explain to you guys what designer toys are, because it's quite a small movement at this point, or especially in Lethbridge. Like Ted had actually said, in all the years he's been doing this, I was the first person he'd met face to face that was a collector as well, which seemed incredible to me because I think he's been doing it for at least 14 years. So designer toys, here's one of my favorite pieces. It's from an artist named Amanda Vassell. She does these incredible, they almost look like 1950s nostalgia pieces, where upon first glance, it's this adorable little, maybe wooden elephant. But then you start to look and it has more layers to it. Designer toys do have a lot more depth than children's toys, because as we get older, we have this ability to understand things in a deeper way. So there's a lot more contrast of cute and maybe sinister. This guy, he's a pink elephant. There's a little drunk on top of him. And the pink elephant, for those of you that don't know, is sort of, it was said to be a famous hallucination, I think probably in the 50s or 60s, that alcoholics would have when they drank too much. So it kind of brings that all together, and it's got the little snake oil guy in his guts. So yeah, it's kind of one of the best pieces, I think. This is another piece with multiple layers of meaning. The artist is Ron English, who is tied to what they call the lowbrow art movement. And designer toys, I've never really decided if they are lowbrow art or are just kind of in that general area. Lowbrow art uses humor to convey a message. A lot of the lowbrow artists don't have traditional educational training. They're technically very good. They're very good at what they do, but they don't have the highfalutin degree. And yeah, you'll see it a lot more. Now it's starting to become, I guess, more mainstream, and it's also called pop surrealism. So one of his famous pieces that some of you might have seen is a very similar character, but it's Ronald McDonald as a morbidly obese Ronald McDonald. And they're very effective pieces. They make you think a lot about the message, kind of talking, especially in this piece, about obesity in North America and the power of children's advertising. So yeah, Fat Tony, that's one of my favorite Ron English pieces. This is the Goon Squad. The artist of these is Frank Kozik. He works, I think, exclusively with Kid Robot now. And these are just little miniature busts that you would get of, well, he described it as 5 famous dictators ready to party. He uses a lot of humor in his pieces, taking popular figures that have a lot of controversy behind them and sort of just making them look a bit ridiculous. And these I wanted to show you guys because often designer toys, they take art out of the gallery and make it more accessible to everyday people, which I think is fantastic. So it's possible to own a piece from one of your favorite artists that doesn't break the bank, so you don't have to have $5,000 for a sculpture from some of the designer toys can be a bit more expensive, but these, for instance, this is Takashi Murakami. He was one of the original Japanese designer toy artists, and it was his goal to get art out of the museum. So he invented something called the Super Flat Manifesto, which was basically giving people the right to see art everywhere. And he kind of thought at the time that Asian cultures were more accepting of allowing art to be everywhere versus Western cultures. I don't think that's true anymore. But these pieces, the Super Flat Museum, they were only available in convenience stores with the purchase of a pack of gum. So he really wanted to make them something everyone could get their hands on, and they're still beautifully crafted. They're not cheap little mass-produced pieces. So yeah, I thought that was kind of a really great idea to have that availability and to have pieces from your favorite artists in your house. These pieces are from Gary Baseman. I like to show these for two reasons. First of all, it kind of illustrates what a blind box is. So each one of these characters is in one of those boxes in a case, and actually right across the street at King of Trade, they have these. So the buyer would just randomly grab one and hope they got what they wanted. It can be a total gamble, but they're kind of a neat idea. And in this particular case, you would be guaranteed to get one of every character. Some of the other series that Kid Robot does, they have, let's say, one character in every 4 cases. So it's definitely smart marketing because they'll sell a lot more things trying to get people to find the character they want. And sometimes they can go for upwards of $1,000 for one little 3-inch figure if it's rare enough, which is kind of interesting. Second reason why I wanted to show you guys this is because this is what sucked me into designer toys. I got one of these figures and wanted them, so I ended up going online and buying an entire case. And now I have my own little secret society. So yeah, they're pretty cute. This is one more of the blind box series. I wanted to show this one, first of all, because I really love Junko Mizuno's art. Secondly, because this is a translation of characters from a comic book she had made, which I love it when someone interprets two-dimensional art in this way, because basically that's what I'm doing. And the characters are just so bizarre as well. She has this great juxtaposition of horrifying and adorable. For instance, the brain spinal cord creature who's still inexplicably kind of cute in the background there. And this is the last one I'm going to show you guys as far as the designer toys go. It's the first person that inspired me to try to make my own toys. His name's Ryan Rutherford, and he owns Rutherford Industries. He started off as a dog toy designer and just made these out of his basement, the Ice Cream Man. He was wildly successful with it, and he posted an Instructables tutorial on how to cast your own toys. You guys might not know, the Instructables website is a website full of step-by-step tutorials on how to do basically everything you could ever imagine. And this is a picture of his basement when he went into production with his toys. But yeah, he's always been very encouraging to the community, giving instructions on how to approach this if you wanted to make your own, as well as just sort of, he's a very approachable person as far as this goes, it's great to know that this can be done. So now I'll try to explain to you guys a little bit about what designer toys are, because I think it's a very confusing sort of category. And I know even now I'm still kind of questioning if things are and are not designer toys. And this is, I should say, this is kind of a personal, I've arrived at this conclusion of what designer toys are, but there are lines and you can kind of fudge things in, and it just depends on how you view it. So designer toys are not these two characters. The Sigmund Freud figure, while funny, doesn't have a lot of deeper meaning to him. He's simply a replication of someone from history. The packaging's great, everything's really cute, and you can also tell he's mass-produced, which designer toys are typically on a run of 500 to upwards of 1,000 is the absolute max usually. On the right, we have the pop figure. There are, I think, about 100 of these at King of Trade. At first I thought they might be designer toys, but then I started to think about it and what I'd kind of laid out as my rules for that sort of thing. And it's just a replication of pop culture. They have adapted it for their own look. It has those eyes, and every character they do has those big black soulless eyes. But as cute as it is not a designer toy. These guys are a blind box series that Kid Robot also does. They're actually starting to kind of veer away from making designer toys all the time, and they do more of these pop culture replications, which are very cute, but they don't have any meaning. They're more for fans. So yeah, those aren't designer toys. And this is when we get into the complicated area of what designer toys are. I'd mentioned earlier the blank vinyls, and I showed you that Moody that Ted Stilson had made. So a blank vinyl toy, you make your own art on top of it. You can sculpt onto it, paint onto it. You can use any medium you like to kind of jazz it up. For the most part, I say these are not designer toys just because anyone can do it without any sort of idea of content, or a 3-year-old could grab a marker, and they're great for that. They're great for involving children in making toys. But for the most part, like the middle one is the first designer toy I ever made, and as you can see, it's rough as all get out. And it was just sort of a practicing sculpting. I didn't really have any idea of content for it, so that guy's not a designer toy. However, on the right we have a money doll from an artist named 64 Colors. 64 Colors works a lot with Kid Robot, and they have their own line of designer toys as well. I feel like they've put a lot of thought and into this toy, a lot of time. There's a lot of crafting in it. I would say this is probably a designer toy, but it's in that gray area that I kind of said earlier, where it may be, it may not be. It's clearly more of a designer toy than the one in the middle. But these ones I'm really torn on. I discovered this probably about 2 weeks ago. It's an artist named Mike Levitt. He does these incredible miniature sculptures of famous artists, kind of adding some of their most famous work into the sculpture. Because there's that combination of a replication of a person and sort of that meaning within their art, like the Jeff Koons one, who is an artist that works with a lot of pop culture, and some of his most famous pieces are these massive balloon animal sculptures. That one to me seems like a designer toy. Takashi Murakami on the right, who you guys might remember did the Super Flat Museum. His as well, I feel like it's a designer toy, but that's just my opinion. So I wanted to kind of give you guys some general guidelines of what I believe designer toys are and are not. So they are unique characters created by the artist. So like I'd said before, they're not action figures, they're not movie toys, they're not something that was put out to make money off of, say, a video game or something like that. They have many layers of meaning to their content, so they're not children's toys. They make art accessible. That's not an all the time thing. I wouldn't say they're all from famous artists, but that's just one of the sort of things that can be part of it. The small production run is a huge part of it, because even Kid Robot, who does those large pieces, they do the biggest production of designer toys, they only do small runs. I think their max is 1,000. So yeah, they don't set out to make a large profit, which is why Kid Robot is sort of falling into the non-designer toy sort of category now, because of all the pop culture stuff they make, and they know it's going to sell. And that's kind of becoming more important than creating thoughtful pieces. And like I'd said before, they don't recreate characters from popular culture. And yeah, just again, to stress the content thing. Yeah. So now I'll take you guys into sort of my background and what I was doing before I approached this project that kind of got me prepared for it. So I like experimenting with a lot of design work. I also love character creation. For instance, Mr. Pickle here. I really like to anthropomorphize things for no particular reason. But yeah, so I've always kind of been doing that, making weird little comic books and weird little illustrations with creatures. And then on the left was an example of some buttons we'd made. I think it was my first year in new media. And I wanted some packaging that would sort of bring it all together. And so I was kind of going for, I've forgotten the art movement now. Art Deco, I think, in the design. So I wanted the font and everything to sort of be consistent with the actual, I guess the product would be the buttons. This is one of my favorite pieces from my time at the school. I use a lot of humor in my work, or I try to make people laugh all the time, just because I think it's a really great way to get your content across. If you want to people to absorb something. It's easier received with humor. So this is from a fictional competition for the world's greatest lover. I cast the top piece in aluminum after sculpting it in regular clay, and then the two mud flap girls on the bottom are both the polymer clay that I've been using for my sculpting recently. So yeah, that's one of my favorite pieces. These are some little guys I did a few years ago that was sort of the beginnings of me making toys. So they're a set of the Eastern European nesting dolls, but with Mexican wrestlers on them. So I kind of combined the Mexican pastime with Eastern, well, when you go to Eastern Europe, in every single little tourist shop, they've got these little dolls. So I thought that was kind of a funny clash of the two. This is the first time I ever made two-part molds. I'll get more into this when I get into my process, but all of my characters were created with two-part molds. So this was before I came to the university, I was doing a special effects makeup course, correspondence, and I made a mask that was formed to fit the model underneath. And then everything was made with gelatin prosthetics and two-part molds. This is a really messy photo because I wasn't concerned with documenting my work a while ago, but it's a series of resin figures that I made I do a lot of jewelry construction with resin. So there's just a lot of little cutesy ones. I like to embed sprinkles and materials into them. I think half of those glow in the dark. And this is it's not a great photo of them, but the pieces that are the most popular when I make my jewelry, they're sort of steampunkish. So I use a lot of watch gears and robot heads and different things to make these pieces. And this is probably the closest I came to making a designer toy before I started this project. It was my pet GLAM rock. So it's 3D printed. I did all the packaging design, and it was just sort of a little experiment, kind of playing off of the pet rocks of the 70s. And I've now cast it in resin, and if you guys are interested after the talks, I've got my display over there, so there's little resin David Bowies on the table. So now to get into how I did this, I kind of mentioned that this is from a comic book I made. It was about 5-6 years ago before I started at the university. It was called Mr. Bavarian's Enchanted Theremin. And basically the theremin enchanted this food to be alive. So these are the characters I chose to create in resin after I sculpted them. And what I really liked them, other than the fact that I created them in the comic book, was they each have an individual personality. So trying to get that personality across in the toys was challenging, and in the packaging, but it was really interesting for me to have to think about things like font and their facial features and just different things, color associations, and to bring that all together into one sort of project. So how I start is with basic sketches. These are really simple. If I were sending these out to a factory to have them produced, they'd be a lot more in depth. There'd be a lot more instructions, because if you leave anything to chance, apparently they'll make their own decisions at the factory and you won't get what you want. But for me, of course, I knew the characters really well. I knew what I was going to be doing with them. So it was more sort of height guidelines to try to keep everything uniform and the size I wanted, so I could reference them when I was sculpting. Here's me sculpting with a rainbow across my face. Any of the nice pictures were taken by Tyler Scrabick, who is a fantastic photographer. And when you're sculpting, you typically make a form underneath out of tinfoil or wire, or like these guys were small enough that I just used tinfoil. It makes a lot lighter of a piece, and it also saves on a lot of material. So that's always good. These were the final sculpts for 3 of the characters. We had Cornelius, Lolita, and Pete and Perry, the conjoined twins. This is the molding process. So it can be really messy, you want to make a little box. That's why Lego's so great, because you can customize it to the shape you want to make. You put modeling clay underneath it to kind of keep it half submerged. And then those little holes are for keys. Basically, you want to make sure the molds line up when they're finished. So if you have your keys there, then when you pour the silicone on top, it'll form into those. And then when you flip it over, like I did in the middle, in theory, it should make a nice little pull apart. However, one of the things I learned in this project was the mold release I thought would work acts as glue for silicone, so I had to cut the mold apart. So the keys weren't very efficient, but the mold actually works wonderfully, so I was lucky there. I'm sorry about these terrible pictures. I usually take them with my phone when I'm in my pajamas and doing other stuff. So this is one of the big pours I did where I cast all the characters at once. So as you can see, there's little rubber bands to try to squeeze the molds together so you don't have a lot of bleed out of the resin. And that works for most of them, except for the corn dog. He was quite tricky. And that's why there's so much garbage bag down to not ruin anything. And these were the guys once they were finished, fresh from the mold. They hadn't been cleaned up, hadn't been painted over with more resin. But that was just a very exciting day when they were finally all done and I got to see everything come out. I'm still having a little bit of issue with bubbles, which is why the corn dog's mouth is partially missing, but I'm going to work on pressurizing the stuff to get the bubbles out. So I don't know if I mentioned that I'm using resin here, which is a 2-part plastic that comes as liquid and you mix it together and it slowly hardens. So here are the mistakes and disasters and the learning experiences. Initially, when I wrote my proposal, I wanted to explore a lot of different ways of creating an object for casting. So I wanted to do some digital methods. This was a program called 123D Make. What it basically is supposed to do, in theory, is you take a lot of photographs of one object from different angles, about 80 photographs. When you put them into the computer, it's supposed to give you an exact 3D model of what you'd photographed. On the right is what happened. There's not a hint of a corn dog in there. I'm not really sure what went wrong, but I did it so many times to try to get it. I followed all the instructions, and I don't think I'll ever use that program again. But it was a learning experience. These were that's actually what would have happened with the 3D model. I was going to print it with the 3D printer we have at the school, the MakerBot. So in the end, I ended up using a 3D sculpting program and sort of building them in that way, which is a lot more like the traditional methods of sculpting by hand. So they didn't turn out exactly as I was hoping. They're too symmetrical to mix with the hand-sculpted pieces. And I like how the hand-sculpted pieces look better, just because they're more, they have more personality when they're imperfect, I think. So now we'll get on to packaging. My mission was to create a package for each piece that excuse me, properly conveyed the personality of each character. So I'll start with Klaus here. He was inspired by a 1980s new wave pop singer named Klaus Nomi. And Klaus Nomi was his image was very angular, very geometric. It looks like there's little imperfections in the corners, but when you print it, those go away. So you don't know what's going on there. But yeah, and then you have I didn't change those out. On the actual package, you have each character's story on the back, but I got Lolita's in there. And then you've got sort of the collect them all. A lot of this goes back to my childhood, and it was in the 80s. So it was a big time of commercializing everything and trying to sell as much as you could to kids. This is Lolita's, a lot more girly and she's the only girl, so I wanted to make it really cutesy. Use the polka dots and sort of a little mirror-looking thing in the background. Pete and Perry's, because they're sort of the children of the group. I wanted it really adorable and fun, and so the spaceship and the stars kind of played into that. Ambrose is the evil one, so I wanted to tie him into the Illuminati and sort of have some conjuring things in there. So I've got the old alchemy symbols and that with him. He was really difficult to design, but I like how it turned out. And then Cornelius, the party guy, he was the worst one. I think I finalized this only about a week ago. It was just really hard to think about his personality because I guess he's probably the least developed of all the characters. So I like what came out of it, but yeah, he was a struggle. And this is a photo of them after I vacuum sealed them and put them all together. My lovely father helped me build a vacuum sealer. I'll show you guys what that is in a moment. And so you get what they call blister packaging, which we've all seen this. It's just that plastic that forms over an object to kind of keep it all sealed and safe. I think it gave it, well, once I figure out what glue to use, I think it'll give it a more professional look as well. And this is the vacuum sealer. It's hard to tell, but behind that wooden box is an electric skillet to heat up the plastic. So the plastic's secured in that little window. You heat it up, and then when it's hot enough, you turn the vacuum on, plop it over, and it sucks the plastic down and makes a perfect mold over your object. I never quite got it hot enough to make the mold as perfect as I wanted, but that's just troubleshooting for next time. I think I'll move it closer to the heat source. And there's a picture of it's hard to tell, but there is plastic over those, I promise. But yeah, that's basically what happens. It's really a neat process. You can use it for making chocolate molds and a lot of different things. So that's kind of, and then I made promotional items as well. There are still buttons available over there, so if anyone's interested after the show, help yourself. And there's stickers as well. I wanted to create a really fun experience as far as the show went, especially since designer toys aren't something you typically see in an art gallery. So I wanted to try to create an experience that could make you feel like a kid even as an adult. So yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. And I also created a website for it. You can read the copy or a PDF copy of the comic on the website as well. It's free to whoever wants to look, and there's just sort of backstories for the toys, explaining what a theremin is. If you've not seen one, it's an instrument you play without touching it, which is incredibly interesting. And the shop, which will be up by summer, but I haven't got that part up yet. So I think I'm going to probably re-sculpt the corn dog. I'm not totally happy with him yet, and try out some experiments to perfect the toys. And yeah, I think that's about it. So that is my contact information. Thank you guys so much for listening on this cold and wintry summer's day. And if anyone has any questions, yeah.